The Brothers of Liberty, here to remind you what true freedom is.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Brothers of Liberty with the older brother Kelton here. A couple days ago, well, newsflash for today, because today is Friday, they voted on the assault weapon ban and it passed the House with 5 Democrats voting no on it and 2 Republicans voting yes on it. Nice to weed out the rhinos before the midterms, right? But with that being said, this video here is about a few days ago, a representative, Hank Johnson of Georgia, introduced legislation called the Supreme Court Tenured Establishment and Retire Modernization Act, or TERM Act. It is to give the Supreme Court term limits. Now, there was another thing a year ago in September 2020 of HR 8424 of a similar bill trying to put term limits on the Supreme Court. Now, this one, like I said, was introduced a few days ago. Don't even have an HR number associated with it yet. But I'll have the link of where you can find the bill, the text of the bill anyway. Now, it's funny how the Democrats are now talking about putting term limits on the Supreme Court. But you don't hear them talking about putting term limits on Congress. I would think that you want term limits on Congress, considering that they're the ones who make the laws. Are they that honorable that they don't need term limits? Congress put term limits on the president, saying someone in power to be elected 4 terms was too much power for one person, and now they're saying a lifetime holdment, which the Constitution does give, which what they're passing may be unconstitutional, so they may have to amend the Constitution, or what they're trying to pass could be unconstitutional from a couple things I've read, where they want to say the Supreme Court has too much power because there's no term limits. But yet, senators and representatives who serve in the House for 40, 50 years are not powerful, even though they make the laws of the land. The president executes the laws, executive branch. The legislative branch makes the laws for everyone to follow, but yet they're saying that they don't need term limits. And it's funny because the state convention of states are one of the issues is getting term limits for Congress and to amend the Constitution. And believe it or not, there's actually been a few senators and House representatives to try to get term limits, resolution of term limits in Congress, but it's funny how Congress doesn't want to pass those. There's actually one that went for the amendment back in the 90s, sponsored mostly by Republicans, not Democrats, but they didn't get the 2/3 they needed to push the amendment through. There was also more recent developments in 2019 and 2021 resolutions made by Senator Ted Cruz, a Republican, in the Senate. 15 senators co-sponsored the bill, all Republican, none Democrat, to introduce term limits. Both times, and the same senators in 2019 and 2021. Now, the Democrats, funny. The Democrats use the excuse that the reason why they want term limits for the Supreme Court justice is because the last 5 Supreme Court justices was appointed by a president who lost the popular vote. Well, when you look at different polls, the popular consensus is term limits. There was one report done in 2019 or 2020 where it was spoken to the Judiciary Committee on Senate Joint Resolution 1. 82% of voters welcome term limits. And when you break it down, 89% of Republicans, 76% of Democrats, and 83% of independents all want term limits. It seems the only thing that everyone can agree on. But yet, the Democrats who say, oh, people shouldn't be that powerful, and you should listen to the voice of the people in the popular vote and the popular consensus, doesn't want to listen to the popular consensus because they want control and power for themselves. Because it's mighty funny, in 1997 there was also a House resolution sponsored by a Republican, co-sponsored by 137 representatives. Only 7 of those representatives were Democrats. HJ Resolution 9, sponsored by a Representative Hollingsworth, Republican, co-sponsored by another Republican. They'll do anything. Representative Tim Burchett out of Tennessee, probably pronouncing his name wrong, most recently of the House in November 2021, sponsored legislation to amend Constitution or introduce. That did not even get assigned an HR number or a joint resolution number. Just remember, Pelosi's in charge. So yes, Democrats want to talk about term limits until it becomes term limits for them. Funny how most of these are sponsored by Republicans. Even in the 90s, it was Republicans who wanted term limits. The Democrats always shot it down. Do you really think the Democrats are for the people when the people want it as well? In 1995, there was a Supreme Court decision that stated states cannot impose qualifications for prospective members of Congress or for qualification for prospective members of Congress stricter than those specified in the Constitution. Several states in the 1990s decided they were going to ratify their own state constitutions and impose term limits for how many times a person can run in a district of the U.S. and a senator. It went to the Supreme Court. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that no, states cannot impose term limits on federal offices. You know who the 5 opposing people were that voted against term limits for the states to institute term limits for federal offices? Now, mind you, 3 of them were Republicans, but they always voted liberal. They called them rhinos, Republican in name only. And Ruth Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer, of course, are Democrats. The 3, John P. Stevens, Anthony Kennedy, and David Stoddard, has always been called rhinos and always pretty much been said they're Democrats in Republican clothing. The 4 people that voted it down, all Republicans: Clarence Thomas, William Rehnquist, Sandra Day O'Connor, and Antoine Scalia, because they believe in term limits. And if you say you do not believe in term limits, then I ask you, why do you want a body that has no term limits to keep on doing what they're doing? They haven't got it right. Nancy Pelosi been in there for 40 years. Biden was in there for 40 years. Even some Republicans have been in there for 40 years. But yet, Congress approval has always been under 40% in the last 20 years. But yet, I don't hear the people roaring loud enough for term limits and saying, if you don't vote for term limits, we're voting you out. But that's just my opinion. What's your opinion? Like, share, subscribe. Have any comments? Fill them in the comment box. Because I'm sorry, this should be an issue for everybody. If you're putting term limits on the president, and now the Democrats want to put term limits on the Supreme Court, let's get term limits on Congress. Any topics you want me to discuss? brothersofliberty76@gmail.com. We'll love to hear from you. And once again, this is the older brother of Liberty reminding you what true freedom is and ought to be.